Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special council meeting. I'm going to call our meeting to order at 3:30 p.m. Before we begin, I'd like to just provide a few friendly reminders. Assisted listening devices are available for anyone who may need one during tonight's meeting. Please ask the deputy clerk who can help you sign one out and get set up. And we kindly ask that all devices be returned at the end of the meeting or before you leave so that they can be collected and made available for future use. Please also note that washrooms are located down the hall to the left, and in the event of an emergency, residents are asked to exit in an orderly fashion using the stairs located outside of council chambers. Should the staircase be unavailable, residents are asked to proceed down the fire escape located at the back of council chambers, and if assistance is required, please see staff, of course. Moving on to the next item, we're going to start with a moment of silent reflection, but before we do so, I'd like to share my own reflections with you this afternoon. Last week, a tragic accident on Highway 401 just east of Port Hope claimed the life of an OPP officer from the Northumberland Detachment while in the line of duty. This devastating loss has had a profound impact on families, colleagues, and first responders within our community and across the community. The officer's funeral will take place tomorrow, Wednesday, May 6th in Cobourg, where the community will come together to honor their services and sacrifice. We extend our deepest condolences to the officer's loved ones and offer our sincere gratitude to the first responders who attended the scene. The heartbreaking events of last week serve as a solemn reminder of the risks faced every day by those who work to keep our communities safe. With that, please join me in a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement. The Municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to work, live, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Before we move on to our items for consideration, does anyone around the table have any pecuniary interest to disclose? Seeing none, we will move on to 3.1, Report DS 0626, re-extension of temporary uses for 196 Toronto Road and 2267 Balch Road. Are there any questions for staff from around the table in relation to this report? Seeing none, the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Darrell. All in favour? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to 3.2, Report CAO 0326, Municipality of Port Hope, response to Ontario Power Generation's response to Impact Assessment Agency of Canada's summary of issues. Are there any questions around the table for staff in relation to this particular report? I think it's a summary of things that we've heard at the table, we've discussed at the table, but it's nice to see it succinctly summarized into one document. So if there are no questions or comments on this, the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. And can I get a mover and seconder to receive this for information, and that staff be authorized to share the report with IAC and OPG? Councillor Darrell will be moving. The Deputy Mayor is seconding. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 3.3, Report CAO 0426, Municipal Response to the April 7th, 2026 release by IAC of Public Engagement Plan and Draft Integrated Tailored Impact Statement Guidelines. I'm also going to pass this portion of the meeting to our Deputy Mayor, as I will be making some motions in relation to this item. So I'm going to pass the chair at the moment to our Deputy Mayor, Adam.
Thank you. Ooh, I'm loud. Okay, so we have a presentation from staff, so I'm going to ask staff right now to start with the presentation.
Okay, my name is Leo Deloyd. I'm working with the Municipality of Port Hope in assisting with the discussions and the readiness plans for the proposed nuclear plant. To my left is Carolyn Deloyd, Dr. Deloyd. She's a professor at Queen's University and Natural Heritage and Environmental Assessment, Impact Assessment. So, having said that, this is a really important milestone in the project. So for the past 5 months, there's been a lot of concentration on getting ready and planning for the process. And so this is a really critical point where if the foundation's not right, the rest of it could go sideways. So we've paid very close attention to the documents that have been released. So there's 2 documents that are out there now in terms of the, so as I mentioned, Ontario Power Generation is the proponent, and they're engaging in the impact assessment process, and they need approval from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Group, as well as IAC. IAC is the lead. The Impact Assessment Agency is responsible for establishing the technical and public engagement requirements for a panel review for the proposed nuclear plant. On April 7th, significant documents arrived, and the draft integrated tailored impact statement guidelines, along with the public engagement plan, so the PEP. And the municipality and its citizens were given 30 days to go through all that material and determine whether it was acceptable. And so that process has been concluded, and that's the subject of the report before you tonight. These documents will guide the impact assessment process. So as I said, it's really important to get them right from the get-go. OPG is in active discussions with the Michi-Sagig and Williams Treaty First Nations folks, and there is some parallel environmental impact assessment being undertaken at that point. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Deloyd, and she's going to speak to the guidelines. This is kind of a speak now or forever hold your peace moment on getting these guidelines right. So we're going to describe what we thought ought to be done.
Good afternoon. I'm going to give a bit of an overview with respect to the tailored impact statement guidelines, some of the issues that have been raised by the Municipality of Port Hope during our initial meetings, our summary to issues, and as the process has been unfolding. As was mentioned, the process is led by the following of these documents. And so it's important that these documents are set out to reflect the issues that have been raised by the Municipality of Port Hope. When we took our first look at those draft integrated tailored impact statement guidelines, we noticed that much of the focus is on items under what we call federal jurisdiction, and such as things like nuclear energy, ecosystem components, species under federal jurisdiction. We request that the impact statement guidelines be revised to address all matters of concern, irrespective of the jurisdiction, as set out in the report recommendations. The review of the draft guidelines, we find that it focuses on describing many ecosystem components. And in fact, in some cases, there's little attention being required to, in fact, assessing the impacts themselves, identifying the residual impacts, the mitigation measures, and as well as the cumulative effects. So we're suggesting that the Municipality of Port Hope requests that the impact guidelines be revised to focus on not only describing, but also assessing impacts and cumulative effects as set out in the report recommendations. Another interesting component with respect to the integrated guidelines is there is another document known as the generic requirements for impact statements. And we have raised concerns with respect to the pathways that would be chosen as to using the generic requirements as well as the integrated tailored impact statement guidelines and how those two things work together. So if clarification can be given with respect to those, we're hoping to see that in the next iteration of the documents. We'd like to draw to your attention the integrated component of the title that we're looking at of the document. It's integrated, and what that is referring to is, in fact, the integration of the requirements for the license to prepare site application. So we have the impact statement guidelines in there, but we also have the requirements for the license to prepare the site, and that's what's making it integrated. It appears, however, there is no public comment or revisions that are considered to the license to prepare site application. It falls under the purview of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and it involves the applicant, OPG, of course, submitting technical evidence, site characteristics, environmental effects, and safety measures. So when you read through those integrated statement guidelines, you do see those integrated requirements for the site to prepare the site, and you see a lot of descriptions written there, and that's required for that component. I'd like to bring up a concept known as social license. That's social license to operate, and that's an ongoing and informal approval, acceptance of a company or a project's business practices by local communities, stakeholders, and rights holders, and the public. And this social license to operate is intangible, really. It's based on trust, legitimacy, credibility, and it requires companies to meet social and environmental standards, in fact, beyond the legal requirements. So that's something we'd like to bring up today for consideration. In fact, something to achieve social license would require the active support, participation, or even co-ownership or co-creation on behalf of interested parties. In planning, the concept of social license is really linked to the ladder of citizen participation, and that's why we are linking this to the participation engagement plan that we'll be speaking of next. So it's really important that we're working together to get that, as you saw the quotes, ownership, that is sort of a co-ownership, a stewardship that we've all contributed to what those guidelines are saying. And so that ladder of citizen participation in planning goes way back to 1969. In fact, Sherry Arnstein has put that ladder together. And at the bottom, we have very basic, sort of almost non-consultation, where it begins with simply what we call just kind of listening and not really collaborating. And right up to the top, we get actually citizen control and partnership as we go up that ladder. And social license, therefore, requires that trust be established between the participants, and it's seen as significantly higher a threshold than credibility or legitimacy. And it is possible, as you know, to approve projects after consultation, which is fairly low on that ladder of participation, but it may not achieve social license. That's that stewardship, that co-ownership, that agreement that we've all contributed to the establishment of that project, if no trust can be established between the parties.
So just moving quickly then from the technical to the social license, OPG through the federal regulators is seeking social license from this community, the public and others, to proceed with its plant. And to do so, they've established the IAC has proposed a public engagement plan. And I should mention that Kate Ingram assisted with this part of the presentation, and she's here to, there she is, there you are. She's here to help answer any questions. But clearly there's a lot of work that needs to be done. If you think of the material that's been circulated, it's really basic, and it needs significant improvement in several areas, including purpose, clarity, and detail, transparency and accountability. Accessibility and inclusiveness is something this council has dealt with recently, and I don't think it meets those tests. And needs to be amped up considerably. Certainly the timing and process design. So if the public says something, what happens to it? How does it get reported? Does it go on a website? Does it get rolled up to a high level? And we're not sure how that'll influence decision making. So equity, diversity, and inclusion. So a lot of the documents that are out are very complicated, and how do we communicate that, and what's the role? So that's the public engagement plan. So the recommendation asks for improvements, and we're suggesting in terms of next steps that staff work with IAC and OPG to get involved in improving these. These two documents, the target date for finalizing this, so we ended up with a kind of a breakneck rapid deployment. So on April 7th, we received the documents. The commenting period ends May 7th, and then they hope to have it finished by June. So this is moving really quickly. So staff are offering to work with the federal regulators and OPG on improving those documents. The IAC will consider those inputs. And then the other thing that's happening behind the scenes is Port Hope staff are preparing the readiness plans and getting the technical studies geared up to look at natural heritage, transportation, housing, infrastructure, and economic development. And so that's so we'll be reporting further on that. And the other thing that we've asked as a municipality is that we begin negotiations for the host city agreement. And so we've reached out to a number of host cities, and we know the lay of the land, and we're getting ready to deal with the host city agreement if the project proceeds, and that will deal with decision-making, financial matters, taxation, and certainly other strategies. So those are our comments, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation. At this point, I'm going to open it up to council for any questions. Councillor Les.
I take it you are not happy with the inclusiveness between our staff and IAAC. Is that a...
So let's wind it back to February 3rd. So on February 3rd, this council considered a report and passed a resolution and said, this is very complicated. Can we get involved and work with you on the technical aspects and the public participation? We really didn't hear anything. And then boom, on April 7th came the two big reports. So things are moving very quickly. So we have, as host city, think we should have the respect and involvement in these key documents.
So is there a point where IAC could produce their report by the end of June or whatever their time frame is, and we just say, nope, we're not happy with it. We're not going forward.
Well, go ahead. Oh, so,
To the CA.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. First of all, this is a federally regulated process. We can't change timelines. We can't change those. I do want to say, and I do want to comment, that IAC have been incredibly supportive of the staff and working with Leo and Carolyn, meeting with them several times already, I think. They have been really helpful, and they actually are present here today as well, so if you have any questions for them. I do want to point out that, yeah, there has been a significant shift towards supporting staff, especially in the technical guidelines. They're very technical, and Dr. Deloitte had some incredible questions that they were able to handle and to create those responses for us. So they've been significantly helpful in getting this over the line for May 7th. So I would say, yeah, they've been, I think that was your question originally, was are they supportive? Yes, they have been really supportive as of late. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first question, you mentioned very briefly about site preparation. Can you expand on the scope of that? I've had a lot of questions come to me as far as when are the measurements taken? Are they taken prior to site preparation, during, after? What does site preparation exist of? Is it structural, human impacts, property values, all of, like, what is the scope of site preparation?
Is that with respect to the license to prepare the site, coming under the purview of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission? Is that the question that you're asking about?
Yes.
Perhaps we should have the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission respond?
Sorry, through you, Deputy Mayor. The CNSC is here as well, the Impact Assessment Agency. I think to your question, Councillor Mink, the impact assessment process is going to be exploring all that. When we talk about site preparation, it's a bit premature at this point in time because they haven't even decided on the technology yet. And that won't be coming out till later this year, but that'll be in part of the impact assessment process. And this whole site preparation, what they're going to need to do from a road structure, from the socioeconomic impacts, all that will be handled through once they have a better handle on the type of technology. But that is part of the federal impact assessment process.
So will there be an opportunity for the community to comment through that process, or is that going to be something that will be presented after the fact?
The license to prepare site document, that license does come a bit later. However, they are gathering information now as set out in the tailored impact statement guidelines, which are integrated, and that's what is actually integrated. So we are commenting on that entire document, and you can see that, but a lot of those components describe the physical site, but as the CAO had said, there's further work that has to be done before we get to that component. So not really an opportunity as such to comment on the requirements for the license to prepare site, because that is set out fairly clearly, and that comes under the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's purview, and they will be required several pieces of information with regard to the physical site, safety measures, environment, in order for that license to be granted.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So, and then one completely different question regarding citizen participation and public engagement plan. And maybe, I don't know if this is for you or for sort of our council and staff, but where is the opportunity for the public to just express themselves, not through the process necessarily, but to this council? There's a question period at the end, but it's not really a fulsome opportunity to get that engagement where people just need to ask questions. They need to talk about their experiences. And I don't feel that there's that need. People are asking for that. They don't want to make it a formal survey and a formal submission, but they just want to talk about it to this council collectively.
Through you, Chair. Fabulous question, Councillor Mink. We had piloted, I had mentioned in the past, we have piloted a project for citizen engagement and community engagement. Listening circles is what we're calling it. and we did a pilot project on very specific topics: taxation, OPG, and ward boundary review. It was hugely successful in my mind. It was random residents were chosen as a steering group, and then it was these broader circles were created. It was an approach we wanted to pilot specifically for getting ready for OPG community engagement. We've made the decision to wait until we have more information through the impact assessment process before we do that, specifically the type of technology that we're going to be, that will be chosen for the site, and then roll it out to the community, start these listening circles. And the concept is the listening circles are a broad range of perspectives from the community, from rural to urban, age, gender, all sorts of things, to have a broad, diverse perspective. And then ultimately the goal would be to train those listening circle people to go out and create their own listening circles and create that grassroots movement so we can hear everything from the public. It's like throwing a rock in a pond, and the circles get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's what the goal is, and that'll be starting later this year once we have a better handle on the technology first.
Wonderful, thank you. Councillor Attridge.
One of the next steps that you listed is Port Hope requesting it be involved in improving the technical guidelines and the public engagement plan. Any understanding, or can you let us know when you think that request may be granted?
It needs, yeah. Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor, the next step is with regard to improving the technical guidelines, not necessarily approval, but approving. But were you asking? Oh.
Yeah, I was asking about our involvement. So the request is for us to be involved, and I was wondering whether or not you have an understanding of when we may get that request approved.
As the CAO indicated, there's been a number of conversations with CNSC and IAC staff and OPG staff since these reports came out, and we could see ways that we could work together to reduce the confusion and have this more specific and more inclusive. And so we're hoping and we're asking and in these meetings to collaborate on these documents. But this is moving very quickly.
Right, and I guess that's where my question comes. Like, I know you're asking to be involved. At what point do we get involved?
We'll find out. We'll find out soon.
Thank you. Madam Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. And as I read the reports and hear you report on the reports, we're very grateful for your technical expertise. And I know that the rate in which we're reviewing these documents is pretty breathtaking. But I want to just follow up on what Councillor Todd had raised, because a number of my resolutions this evening really speak to that point, and also they reflect some of the conversations we've had at the table previously about our standing in the process and some of the advocacy that was undertaken by Leo and our CAO and myself last week at the CNA. And so I'm hoping that by also considering these in a moment, that might also help us take a very definitive stand.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Oh, Councillor Clare?
Yeah, I think it's sort of related, but I think I tried to read through both the staff report but also the IAC documentation from the lens of our own EDI framework. And I think the central question there is always who's most impacted, and are they centered in the process and able to be involved and have input. And it also strikes me that, I really appreciated some of the comments in the staff report, those questions around how is input weighted, and is input from Port Hope residents weighted differently than inputs from communities that are less impacted. And I think I'm also curious about how that works internally within Port Hope. Communities obviously in the rural area to the west of town would be more impacted in terms of property values, the impact of construction, and that on their day-to-day lives than those elsewhere in the community. And I think the way the process is structured, it's really designed to be digital input through the official channels. And our rural community, as we know, doesn't always have that capacity. And I'm curious to know if we could also look at how could we be more, I guess, explicit and strategic about those paper-based or in-person-based engagements that are specifically designed to reach that part of our community who is most directly affected.
Kate Ingram had identified a number of areas that needs to be improved. Certainly, the public participation side is still early days. I should mention and give credit to OPG. OPG's got their nuclear research center, or their nuclear discovery center on Toronto Street, and there are a number of events that they attend. So they're doing things above what the IAC's putting out, and we're trying to level that in terms of the engagement. But how do you get to true engagement? I think that's, Kate, did you want to add anything?
Through the chair, I'll move over so that you don't have to crane your neck and look back. So yeah, just to reiterate what Leo mentioned, we did identify that this is very digital based and that there could be and should be opportunities for different types of not only engagement but communication of the engagement taking place, because if you're not online, you might not even know that it's happening. So things like radio and signage and mail outs. But I think that could extend, Councillor Clare, to, they are holding in-person engagement opportunities, and those are either in-person or digital. But I think there might be an opportunity for potentially also extending that beyond to paper-based or something along those lines. I think that was a good point. And again, you brought up the point about how are how's the data being weighted, or is it being weighted? We're a little bit, I think it's a little bit unclear, and so we did ask for that clarification and consideration of the data as they move forward.
I did have another comment about, and perhaps it's covered and I missed it, but I just wanted to flag, to me when I was reading the documents, the section around recognizing the community's history with industrial projects and construction projects, it felt to me that our nuclear history was treated like more of a footnote than I think reflects the actual reality for Port Hope as a community. You know, the PHAI is still very real for a lot of residents, and I think that deserves, a little bit more concerted focus through this process, is really ensuring that as we are experiencing the PHAI, that the community feels confident about engaging in new nuclear and perhaps, isn't going to be afraid of having similar challenges in our community in the future. So I just wanted to, if there's a way to have that be more highlighted rather than sort of as an aside.
We will undertake to raise that as part of this finalization of both the technical guidelines and the public participation plan.
Wonderful. Mayor Hankiski.
So just before, I'm going to ask the clerk to share the resolutions, which I know you're going to guide us through. I did want to follow up with something that Councillor Clare had asked, and I do think that the intention of learning circles is actually to have a fully representative sample of citizens that are participating in the process. So it's not going to be self-selection. It's actually going to be a representation of who actually lives in the community, so that the demographics are fully reflected in those conversations and those circles. And that will mean having that representation from both the rural and urban areas. And then out of those circles, as I understand the process, there's also a possibility for deeper dive conversations on certain kinds of issues. And I know that there's been some discussions now about planning for more public-facing events once the technology becomes announced, that would bring in high-level officials from Federal Minister of Energy, the Provincial Minister of Energy, to a whole range of experts in the field to provide a whole range of different perspectives on these issues, to have a very fulsome conversation so that we're not conversing in silos.
Wonderful, thank you. So do I have any other questions from council right now? Okay, I'm seeing none. So we have the IAC and the CNSC staff here. So at this point, I'm going to ask if there's anything that the IAC staff or the CNSC staff would like to add.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having us here this evening. My name is Candida Chanchi. I'm the Director of the Review Panel Division at the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. First, I just wanted to really thank the Municipality of Port Hope staff for their really thoughtful comments, and we would be very welcome to receive them should this council approve that they can submit that information. But we have gone through the details and are very grateful and appreciative of those comments. I just wanted to reflect on a few comments that we heard, is that we really are wanting to continue the conversations that we've been having with staff in terms of how we can add and improve further clarity in the guidelines on many of the comments that they've raised, as well as how we can enhance public participation, but particularly how we can enhance our engagement with the municipality of Port Hope. And just wanted to reflect that we really are here to, if you have any questions for us, but we're happy to digest them and just continue that conversation with staff and see how we can better reflect and incorporate the comments that we've seen to date.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask council, do you have any questions of IAC right now? No? Okay. Thank you so much for coming in person too. It is so appreciated, at least by me, and I'm assuming by the rest of council too, to have you here in our council chambers instead of just the online. So thank you. Okay, so we do have a recommended motion on the agenda, but the mayor also has a few motions that she would like to put forth. So at this point, I'm going to ask the mayor to put forth those motions, and then we will consider each one of them individually after, but I think it's appropriate for us to see all of them at once.
Well, I'm very grateful for IAC's comments because it's a great runway to the resolutions that I want to put in front of this council, and in fact, if it's passed, to put it right in front of you as serious concerns and serious positioning of the municipality of Port Hope in relation to IAC and the process. So the first, I'm going to ask the clerk to, okay. I'll just continue the drum roll as we're waiting for the technology. Okay, perfect. So the first resolution is a request for IAC to recognize the central partnership role of Port Hope as a host municipality for Port Hope Nuclear. This is something we've discussed at this table, the absence of us being recognized as partners. We're just considered the public for the purposes of the IAC process. It's an item that both the CIO and myself advocated for last week whilst we were at the CNA with both IAC and the CNSC. And so I think it's important to bring this forward as a resolution that we are recognized as a partner, not as a public, that we have the standing of being a partner. The second resolution is symbolic but important. Because I'm struck at how often key decision makers have no understanding that Wesleyville is actually part of the municipality of Port Hope. So the second resolution is to rename the Wesleyville Nuclear Project to the Port Hope Nuclear Project. And the third resolution is really in relation to ensuring that taxation considerations are part of the socioeconomic analysis that takes place. What we have learned from other host communities across Ontario is that the local property tax base issue is very significant. We want to make sure that if this project moves forward, that we do advocate for the best possible approach to this, and we do not want to be at the short end of the stick, as is evidenced by the experience of other host communities. So we do want to include a robust, or this motion speaks to including a robust property tax assessment through the socioeconomic analysis to ensure that we get an equitable and sustainable contribution to the community. So these are 3 resolutions that I bring forward for your consideration this evening.
Wonderful, thank you. So I was considering which one to go with first. Originally, I was going to go with the recommended motion, but I believe that we'll start off with Resolution 1. So if we can put Resolution 1 back up there for everyone, and then I'm going to give about 2 minutes for everybody to read through it, and then I'll ask for a seconder and continue on. So it's just going to give you about a minute or two to read through it. Okay.
Just one friendly amendment to the wording there. It's not the Port Nuclear plant, it's the Port Hope. So in paragraph number 4, if we can just make that additional edit, that would be appreciated.
Has everybody had the opportunity to read it all the way through? Okay. First off, I'm going to ask for a seconder, and then we'll discuss. Seconded by Councillor Andrews, and I'm opening it up to council now for discussion. Councillor Clare.
I was going to second it.
I apologize. I thought you were asking a question. Okay. Questions or comments? Councillor Attridge.
Thank you. I have a comment. I was wondering if we can put it back up on the screen, though. In the final paragraph, I'm wondering whether the language should be stronger and remove the word should. So it reads, and service delivery systems be considered as valuable components. I know it's minor, but it takes a little option, but I'm just...
I don't mind that minor change. I think it was implicit in what I was, it should is actually denotes an action that needs to be taken in order for it to happen, but I'm happy to change the wording.
I'm happy to say with it. I just want to make sure the intention is going through. If the intention's there and you think it's going to come, then I'm with you, and I very much like the motion, so thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from council? I'm seeing none. I will call this to vote. All in favor? And that has been passed unanimously. If I could get the resolution number 2 put up on the screen, please. And I'm going to give council a moment to read this through. Okay, so I believe everybody's had the opportunity now. I just need a seconder for this one, please. Seconded by Councillor Attridge. Open it up for comments and questions. Councillor Clare.
I'm a bit torn on this one, to be honest, because I appreciate the intent and to ensure that those that we need to help facilitate access or facilitate resources, we need these folks to know that it's Port Hope that they need to be speaking with and negotiating with. But at the same time, I feel like we're at a very early stage in the process. We don't yet have a sense of where we stand as a community on this project, should it proceed. And I'm a little bit hesitant about linking our brand as a community to a project that we still know so little about and what it's going to end up being and what the impacts and implications are going to be. So I'm a little torn, and I guess my question is partly, if we were to do this for the impact assessment, this phase, does that necessarily mean that's the name of the project, like the plant, when it, or if it ever comes online, or is this, would this just be for this phase so that we can be sure that everybody's clear on who they should be speaking with?
I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I think, we're trying to be consistent as well with other sites. It's Pickering Nuclear. I think there is consistent language. But I will have to say, I concur with the mayor's sentiment that no one knew where Wesleyville was. It's a little hamlet of Port Hope. it was confusing. It was confusing at best for most people. And I think that's what we're seeking here is the clarity. We've had these conversations. It was actually in the original submission to change the name. I think this just, and council agreed to that at that point in time. I think this is just a further reinforcement of that elimination of confusion, because we saw it firsthand.
Thank you. Mayor Hankiski?
And I appreciate where you're coming from, Councillor Clare, on this, and this is not, this isn't not about linking, but the linking is already being made, so, you know, whether we like it or not, the linking is already being made. It's in no way to negate the fact that the actual location is Wesleyville. But when we are trying to advocate for our best interests in this very complicated and political process, that clarity when we are speaking with decision makers and when you're sitting with ministers and they ask, oh, is Wesleyville in Port Hope? And you're trying to have a discussion that does advance the best interests of your community, it's just a matter of having that clarity and that naming that is out there.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for this resolution? Councillor Mink.
Nothing new, just to add to the two conversations, is that I understand both points of view, and I think there is confusion, of course. For a long time, I didn't know where the Bruce was, because there's no town called the Bruce, right? So, in Darlington and Clarington, so there is you know, confusion with that naming, and I completely understand what the mayor is saying, but at the same time, Claire's point, I don't know how the community feels about having that connection of renaming it from Wesleyville to Port Hope. And I feel I'm taking a giant leap here by just going ahead with this right now at this time.
That's another great point, Councillor Mink. But the bottom line is we haven't asked the community about how they feel about linking Wesleyville to this naming either. And so I think at this stage of the game, you know, you could be looking at it from both sides. But if the purpose here at this stage of discussion and engagement is to ensure that every step of the way we're putting our best foot forward for the community, I think this is the most expedient way to do that.
Wonderful, thank you. Anything else from council? No, I've been a big fan of the naming of Port Hope since day one, so obviously. So at this point, we have a mover and a seconder of Councillor Attridge. I'm going to call a vote. All in favor and opposed? And that has been passed. Thank you. Moving on to resolution number 3, and if I could get that up on the screen, please, and I will give council a minute or two to read this one over. Thank you. Okay, I believe everybody has had the opportunity to read it over at this point, so I need a seconder, please, seconded by Councillor Clare, and I'm going to open it up to council. Councillor Less.
Yeah, I'd just like to know what information we're relying upon to make the statement in the second paragraph.
That's a terrific question, Councillor Less, and I'll speak to it briefly and turn it over to the CAO. This is direct information that has been gotten from CANAC communities, that is Canadian nuclear host communities in Ontario and now emerging across Canada, but I'm going to turn it over to the CAO for more details.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, that is the explicit same language that was done for the Bruce site by tax consultants MTE, the municipal tax experts. They did a similar report for Bruce. And that's their findings by the professional consultants, and we use that same language.
Councillor Mink.
So going off the last word you used, language, in very plain terms for those people, this is a very technical motion here. I'm not sure that everybody fully understands what this means. So for the purposes of the public and everybody listening, what exactly are we saying here? How does this affect individuals?
I think I'll pass that over to the CAO.
Well, I'm just going to say a word on this. This means that we're not at the short end of the stick in terms of our tax base here in the municipality that's related to this project. So we've talked about the unfair tax burden on the residents of Port Hope. We don't want to potentially be considering a project that's not going to give us our just desserts in very plain language.
And now I'll pass it over to the CAO.
Yeah, this was a very big revelation that we had coming out of the Canadian Nuclear Conference last week. Sites that have nuclear hosts, there's different taxation treatments for nuclear generating stations, and it's a much lower taxation. And particularly with Bruce and Kincardine, they are at 1968 tax levels, based on the original plan. So that is the reason why we want to make sure that we are, the analysis of the taxation is considered differently than the past, doing a different approach for this. And I think it's absolutely imperative that it comes through the socioeconomic analysis.
The Mayor? Yep.
And just one other thing to add, we don't want, goodness forbid, to be grandfathered into the existing plant and the taxation on it. And these are really important things for us to be aware of every step of the process in preparation, even if it's in this very early stage.
Councillor Clare?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think, you know, we have talked a lot about growth readiness funding. We've already negotiated for some of that. We know that is going to be coming, but we also talk a lot at this table about asset management and the ongoing costs of maintaining and replacing infrastructure. And the growth readiness funding is really, I think, largely going to be focused on the new infrastructure as required, but it's really important that it not fall onto existing property taxpayers to continue to maintain and replace that infrastructure over the life cycle of the project. So I think this is hugely important as part of the process.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other comments or questions from council? I'm seeing none. Moved by the Mayor, seconded by Councillor Clare. Going to call the vote. All in favor? And that has been passed unanimously. And now we are going to move on to the recommended motion that is on the agenda today. And I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder for the recommended motion. Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Attridge. And I'm going to ask council, is there any questions or comments about this? And Mayor Hankiewicz.
I like the recommended motion, but I would like to also ensure that we have some kind of reporting back from IAC within a particular time frame on the recommendations that have been that are being brought forward from the Municipality of Port Hope. We work on your tight timelines, and we'd like you to work on our tight timelines too.
Okay, recommended motion, moved, seconded. Any other? Sorry, Mayor Hankiewicz, do you need anything else with that? Okay, all in favor? And that has been approved. So at this point, I should be handing the chair back over, but I'm actually going to call a brief 5-minute recess, and then when we come back, the mayor will have the chair when we return. Thank you.
We're going to move on with item 3.4. Presentation by Scott Cameron, General Manager, Historic Waste Program Management Office, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, regarding the Community Advisory Committee, CAC.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Council, residents of Port Hope. I was going to say welcome our guests to our beautiful town, but they left. Hoping they're going to Beamish for dinner. I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement first. Before we start, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Port Hope Area Initiative. It's situated in the traditional and treaty lands of the Williams First Nations, more specifically, the Gunshot Treaty, signed by the Mississauga Nations. I also want to acknowledge that these lands are home to Indigenous people across the province in Canada. I'd like to take a moment of reflection. Today is Red Dress Day. There are many shared stories we heard today that we must carry forward to tomorrow. Today, in my view, it's not about the statistics we've heard. It's about the people, families, loved ones, communities. It's about the aunt that will never come home. The sister or sisters whose case still remains unresolved. The daughters whose laughter still echoes the hearts of who raised her. Red is chosen because in many Indigenous cultures, it's a sacred color. Some believe it helps guide the spirits home. Others see it as a symbol of life, strength, and protection. As a dress ripples in the breeze, it must remind us that the wind carries more than air. It carries memories of those missing and murdered Indigenous women. Today I want to talk about Community Advisory Council. To get to where we need to be, I'll run through a little of the background of Port Hope Area Initiative, run our legal and regulatory framework. Port Hope Area Initiative was built on 3 main foundation documents. They break down to 10 sections. Our legal agreement, which is Public Communications Program, Complaints Resolution Program, Property Valuation Program. Our topic tonight is the Community Advisory Committee. After that's our environmental assessments and our CNC licensing requirements. For the project itself, Port Hope is in phase 2, with Port Granby heading into phase 3, long-term monitoring. The background of Port Hope public information is broken down into 3 major items: timely, accurate information, communication plans, on-site communication staff for the residents, pre-notification of work, signage, timely notification of work. 2 is CNL primary source of information, neighborhood public information sessions, property owner public questions and concerns, contractor information cards be handed out to residents if requested, and project updates to council. 3 is maintain public confidence and support. CNO representatives provide info on Port Hope Area initiatives, and we continue to evolve with the program, respond to feedback changes as needed to meet the community needs. Other items there is the Complaint Resolution Program, CRP. Complaint Resolution Program is a 2-tiered process to help resolve public concerns or complaints. The process is designated to address complaints arising from tangible, physical problems caused directly by the project itself. Property Value Program. The Property Value Program is compensation based on predicted effects associated with the Port Hope Area Initiative construction, not the presence of waste. The program has compensated eligible property owners to verify losses, including loss of sale, loss on rental income, or difficulties with mortgage renewals. The third support to that program is accommodations program. CNL is committed to minimizing disruption of property owners, occupants affected by the Port Hope Area Initiative activities. In some cases, temporary accommodations may be required for residents or non-resident properties. Community Advisory Council, our topic tonight. Legal Section Agreement 5.2. Communications and public information. I'll let the audience and council read that for a minute. During my transition as general manager, my assumption was this council also was maintaining CSC, as some from past experience. And my response to concerns, questions, site tours, inspections, and calls for councillors was always in the mindset of a CAC engagement. Where did my mindset come from? Is working with residents on private properties is different to my last engagement with a CAC organization down the road. It dealt with a nuclear power plant with resident feedback on operations and all of its support functions that were clear, transparent with all the items on Pickering A return to service. I also done some research. The wording in our CAC was close to that in 2000, 2003 on the return to service. Handed out to the councillors is a detailed requirements around the CAC that's in the legal agreement. That's 523. I've broken a couple of those down into the major items. I look at it as a general manager. Municipally driven, each CAC shall be organized and described by the municipality with a mandate to establish the council in consultation with Canada and shall report to the council. Open and transparent. Canada, or its representative, in this case myself, and the CAC will meet, plan, liaison work. The municipality may recognize, may reorganize its CAC, discontinue its CAC, or directly assume the function of CAC. Public input. Liaison with Canada and its representative, which right now is the Port Open Air Initiative, being completed by CNL. We're getting all aspects of work being undertaken for the project, so provide public input on the project planning, implementation, and assisted communicating with the public. Regular meetings. Canada's representative and the CAC should establish regular meetings as scheduled. This meeting is a top-tier requirement. Quarterly updates are provided to Municipality of Council. They started in 2017. And approximately 30 presentations have been given by the general managers of these projects, including 8 by myself. CAC expectations. Improves transparency and public trust. My first council update, it was clear. Port Open Air Initiative and the general managers had missed that. Provide constant feedback and mechanism for community concerns. I've heard clear messages and feedbacks from council and representatives and councillors individually. Assessing and identifying community priorities is made clear by this council, and also complements Indigenous consultation and regular engagement. Core goals of the CSC include meaningful opportunities for residents to influence cleanup and remedial decisions. The cleanup criteria is set by the CNSC in our license. Ensure community concerns are generally considered and community acceptance is desired outcome. The CAC endeavors to serve as an accessible point for residents to contact. Many councillors have reached out individually and collectively about concerns raised by residents. Support CAC operations, coordination, right? Improve response, trust, and clarity with communication engagement requiring the project. This brings me back to my first 90 days. This council set clear expectations, in my view, as a general manager of a CAC body. There's 4 points I took away from that meeting. As project transitions from major projects to small-scale sites, communication with others must be a core component of this project. Lions Park needs to be a core community gathering place for the residents. Camatron Lagoon industrial waste area into a community use area. What I felt was the most important I walked away with, environmental protection for existing natural areas, tree canopy needs to be a core priority of the GM. Those 2 parks I listed have walking trails, sensory gardens, quiet spaces. Camatron in the future will have access to the waterfront trail. Resident communications core with a small site team. Contract partners' cornerstone planning is maintaining trees, which also includes working privately with each property owner around options to save mature trees. What's our path forward? Council for me acknowledges that, pursuant to the legal agreement, Council assumed the role of the Community Advisory Council. In consideration of resident feedback, an important meeting of the public engagement, Council may adopt the following practices and actions to fill or potentially fill the role of CAC. Publish terms of reference, clearly defined mandate, and limits of authority. Public reporting to include meeting schedules, agendas, and minutes. Action item tracking and follow-up mechanisms. Council may also consider the following: clear advance notice, published agendas, advertise dedicated phone numbers for CAC-related concerns or questions or inquiries, advertise dedicated email to address. I'd like to address some of these from the general manager's point of view. Terms of reference are available. We've looked through it. Clearly defined mandate and limits of authority. I believe this council set very clear to me as a general manager of that authority. Part of that authority, my job as general manager, is to protect the public and private properties and their information to the best of my ability. Public reporting includes meeting time schedules, agendas, and suggesting where we'd do better, including a town hall and currently a resident roundtable. Action items and tracking and follow-up mechanisms are clear. One of them is myself returning before 48 to 5 days to talk about CAC. Where do I see as a general manager we're meeting this requirement? Listed up, there's 9 touch points and a set of probably 200 pages or so of standard operating guidelines, procedures the municipality holds me and my team to. What do I see as the public expects and what they're seeing from a GM point of view? The municipality of Port Hope has clearly set, monitors, and enforces expectations that reflect the public's expectations to see, with defined accountabilities for myself and contract partners to meet through active oversight, clear standards. MPH ensures performance aligns with community expectations, and importantly, those expectations are visibly being met. Strong teamwork across the disciplines and organizations has established Port Hope leadership to stay in high standards for performance, collaboration, and accountability with tools that hold CNL and our contract partners to the standards expected. Decisions made by the Port Hope Area Initiative are shaping public expectations for transparency, community engagement, safety, and for myself, respect of individuals' private property information. An example of that, Council's consistent demand, we improve residential communications. We have met those expectations, and in my mind exceeded them. We've now worked with the municipality. We've developed a web-based portal for the residents to access general project information, and also provided password-protected section for each homeowner to receive his or her information on their property. What's CNL's commitments with this? Continue to commit the truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous communities. Complete Port Hope Area Initiative project safely and compliantly. Protection of people and their environment to remain top priority. Continue to meet all license and reporting requirements. Maintain solid management systems to support Port Hope Area initiatives and compliance with regulatory and industry best practices. Maintain health and safety obligations and to work with building a culture of excellence and safety. Work together to clean our environment, restoring our land for future use. Myself and CNL are committed to working with the Municipality Council in the role as CAC to achieve successful completion of this project. Transparency and community relations, and the whole time maintaining private property confidentiality. Mick Witch, thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Scott, for the presentation. And at this point, we will open it up for questions and discussion around the council table. And I do also want to note that there will be a question period this evening. We normally do not have a question period at special council meetings, but I have asked staff to accommodate having questions this evening, and I'm going to talk more in a few minutes about how the questions will be handled, recorded, responded to, and communicated back out to the public through various different means. So I just wanted to note that before we start the discussion. Councillor Clare.
Thank you. Really pleased to be having this conversation in a public meeting, and thank you so much for your presentation, Scott, and especially the slide around next steps and things that council can consider. I did want to add a few thoughts to that, if I may, that if, this is, I appreciate that for you, and I understand for some staff as well, it's always been in your mind that council was fulfilling the functions of the CAC. I've always questioned that, and it was certainly not something that was ever publicly discussed until your last delegation to council. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation in this public forum. If we are now going to acknowledge that we are performing the functions of CAC, which I am comfortable with as the strategy and as allowed in the contract, there's a few things that I think that we need to think about doing so that we can do a better job of being that body for our neighbors. The first is looking at meeting structure. So I think the delegations, I appreciate the quarterly delegations to council, but those are more about receiving information from CNL than they are about providing input and really having like a meaningful engagement. So I would suggest that we need to look at having, instead of delegations on our regular council meeting, to have special council meetings that are dedicated to the CAC functions. And that, I think, should also include public updates from our staff team around work that we know our staff is doing to fulfill some of those functions in the background in a way that's not always visible to residents. I think we also need to have clear and public escalation pathways so that we as members of council, if we're receiving input from residents in our function as CAC, that we know where we share that information and how it gets escalated and dealt with, and we receive updates back from how that information has been actioned. And I understand the mayor has some thoughts on that to share today as well. Which I'm
That was a
looking
really
forward to.
long question.
Pardon? These are suggestions to add to that list of things for us to consider. I think the incoming councils also need, moving forward, to be briefed on the functions of the CAC and the fact that we're fulfilling that, and be provided a copy of the legal agreement as part of our orientation. No, the clerk is already nodding about that. And then finally, I do think there is one part of the list of functions of the CAC that I don't actually think council is in a position to fulfill. And that is the piece around receiving all of the studies and reports associated with the project. Most of those are highly technical documents, and we have people within the municipality far more qualified to review those and analyze those, and are already doing so, and that being our staff. So I guess the only question I have, and this is probably a question for the clerk or CAO or our legal counsel, someone at that table, is given that if we are to publicly acknowledge our role as CAC, but we are not in a position really to receive and review those technical reports and studies, does that need to be somehow a formally delegated authority to staff, or is it simply okay to have that be publicly stated and recognized and shared on our website?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Clare. Yes, staff, it's council, but staff are here to support. And the decision was, we've opted to hire a team of professionals sitting behind me here, which is a fabulous team, technical team that analyzes and studies and reports. I do like the concept of the special meetings, and staff can provide those updates. So when we get to complicated technical reports, staff can review them and simplify it for council and for the public. So I've taken note. I think that's the opportunity. Staff are here to provide the technical report. Staff also respond to queries from residents as well on behalf of council, on behalf as the acting CAC and informally or de facto, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, staff are part of the team.
I'm going to turn it back over to Scott for a comment. Then I'm going to make a quick comment and then turn it over to you, Councillor Les. Scott.
Yeah, so Councillor, from my experience, your staff are fully engaged. And Lauren, I have to speak nice about you this, but she is challenging every step of the way. When I walked into this role, compared to other nuclear projects I've been on, I think it's probably one of the challenging one, but I think she sets the right bar. When I talk about working relationships and setting those standards, that team is doing it. I think my misstep is bringing to that forum where those questions are being asked, they're working through the technical issues. We land on the right spot for the resident, and I need to add that to my quarterly briefings. But, you know, I know for my staff, and so my staff sitting behind me, your team is fully engaged and challenging the project every step of the way with a mindset for the resident.
I think that, Jessica, did you want to, oh, you're just, okay. Wasn't sure if that was the hand up. I just wanted to make a quick comment that you had alluded to in your suggestions, and maybe this is a point of discussion back to the CAO. If we are thinking about that path forward of how we manage inquiries that come to this council table collectively or individually for this particular project, how can that triaging and response interface with what you're planning for a centralized customer service approach for the municipality? Because, of course, this is a very important project for the municipality. There are many other projects, too, that we get inquiries around, and so I'd like to know how this fits into that plan for a centralized customer service portal to ensure that, as Councillor Clare was raising, that the inquiries go to a place, are triaged and are responded to in a timely and consistent way so that council members, as members of CAC, aren't doing X number of individual responses, and that there is one voice that is coming back with the right and the correct and the timely information.
Yes. I think that's exactly the intent of a centralized customer service department, is to funnel everything through one source. A source where it gets tracked, managed, escalated if required, responded to, and feedback. So you get a consistent dashboard of, you know, how staff are performing, responding. Things aren't going off languishing in the ether. They are being acted upon immediately or within a certain time frame, depending on the topic that we get back to. So yes, that is the intent of a centralized customer service department. It will definitely be including any customer or resident inquiries related to the PHAI cleanup, among a myriad of other things. It gets funneled through one source and reported through one source and case managed through one source. That is definitely intent.
And one just quick follow-up. Can we ensure that the centralized customer service portal is linked to the data tracker that we have just passed as a resolution at this council table so that we can get regular reporting back on some of those queries and complaints?
The intent of, I don't like the word portal, I call it customer service essentially department, which will be multimodal modes of communication. It'll be coming to a centralized customer service counter. It can be through electronic email, it can be through a web submission. There's many ways of residents can communicate, and that will roll up into what I call the dashboard. The dashboard for each councillor, you'll know every resident's complaint or how it's been handled, how it's been managed. That is the goal of a centralized customer service, to take it out of the hands of council, put it into the hands of staff to manage, and there'll be regular reporting on that.
Okay, Councillor Lass and then Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different tact, maybe divergent, maybe complementary to the whole issue. And we agree with you. I'm going to start by saying I'll use I because we haven't decided, okay? So this is my thoughts, that I believe that your statement in your slide 4, that the program has to evolve to the feedback and changing needs of the community. So we agree with that. One of the statements is, does the town agree that establishing a CAC now remain consistent with the intent of spirit of PHAI? I can't talk about the spirit, but I can talk about the intent. And I'm thinking that CAC may not be the way to proceed. And I'm saying that because it's not effective for dispute resolution, which is the core problem that our residents are having with CNL at this point in time. So the issue is the direct relationship between the resident and CNL. The balance of power resides with CNL. You hold all the cards. There's no recourse for the resident if they feel they're not properly treated. Okay? They can complain, they can go whatever, they can appeal to the centralized customer service facility or CAC or whatever we choose to call it, but that doesn't get it resolved. And council has no real negotiation power with CNL, nor should we. So what I think is needed is a third-party arbitrator or mediator that can step in to help resolve these disputes. And it has to be somebody that both CNL and the residents can agree upon. So an unbiased third party. So that's my approach.
There's no clapping. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you, this is part of our bylaws. There's no clapping. Thank you for your consideration. Please, and if you can also maybe elaborate on what mechanisms are currently in place and how what Councillor Les is suggesting is either different or builds on that.
So I appreciate the feedback, Councillor. Constructive feedback is always a positive at the end. There is a resolution process. It's 2 phases. Third, there is a possibility to go into a mediator. And it is run by the Government of Canada, so it's ACL. We respond and work for ACL, and ACL is the organization that a resident council CEO can always reach out to. They're our client, and we will follow their direction. But they're the ultimate, have oversight on the resolution, resolve in those problems, if they arise. But a resident does have opportunity through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 to go to a moderator, and that is with ACL. CNL will do everything we can to support the resident council and all the information and take the facts forward, but the decision lies with ACL.
And thank you for that. And I think that those steps have to be laid out as part of the whole determination of how we're going to go forward, because what we're doing now is not working. Thank you.
Appreciate your feedback.
Councillor Todd, did you have? No? Back to you, Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councillor Les, and the idea of a third party when there are disputes between CNL and individual property owners. And I think that is one component of the role of the CAC, but it doesn't capture the full functions of the role. And I think the piece that I would like us to consider as well as how it's going to work in new processes moving forward is what about the aggregation of all of the individual experiences that people are having from a trends perspective? Who's going to be doing the work of identifying that, hey, all of these people are now talking about drainage issues. Is there something that we need to look at more holistically with respect to drainage in the residential cleanup portion of the project? Where does that responsibility lie, and when do those conversations take place? I think that's probably the most meaningful part of the CAC's role, really, is to ensure that we're looking at that total picture and not just the individual properties in silos.
Yeah, fair point. I will take that back. I know, working very clearly with the municipality's staff, that trends in adverse conditions around road allowances, ditches, other areas has been brought to our attention several times. We worked with them. Small scale sites director and the deputy director do look at multiple trends. Do we need to change the project? And we walk flows, our field liaison, will work one-on-one with the resident. But there's one thing that you did say about bundling everything together. And I have to put my general manager hat on. You know, the difference between what we're talking about CAC today and the one I worked heavily with on a major nuclear power plant returned to service is I must protect private property information as much as possible. I have full confidence that residents reached out to multiple counselors individually with a concern under confidentiality and brought that to my attention, and we worked to resolve it. I am concerned we start building databases that a private property's person and their information where they are in cleanup could slip out and be public. I do everything I can to protect every resident, their property condition, under, I would say, a cloak of secrecy, because I don't believe other residents should understand or have that free access to that. So part of my challenging this process is to make sure that resident with that property, that condition, information is protected.
I'm going to just jump in and ask a question, and maybe this is both for you, Scott, but also for you, Lee. And that is it a conflict of interest for a member of council that is affected by the PHAI to serve as a member of CAC as outlined in the legal agreement?
So I can go first if you want, or I'm going to always defer to the lawyer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the way I understand it is the Community Advisory Committee is an advisory committee. They don't have decision-making power over the project. That would be with AECL. So I don't see that there would be a conflict of interest there. That there are also some exemptions in the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act that may apply as well, where members of council are on boards as a result of their duties as a councillor. So one of those exemptions may also apply, but just the fact that the CIC is an advisory committee, the personal experience actually may be an asset to you in fulfilling that role. So.
Thank you for that clarification. From our legal counsel, it is a question that has come up in the public towards this process, but Scott, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've asked the same question when I first started, used to what was down the road where we had non-disclosure agreements with CAC and the residents, but that was feedback to a nuclear facility and how they seen our performance around fire safety, nuclear operations and all that. I've asked that question, understood that, council, that a resident does come to you for support. It's under a cloak of confidentiality, and that's who they work for because you're their advocate. And that's the same thing. So I felt comfortable with the response I got that a councillor could act that way and would sit as a CAC under that confidentiality agreement. I have concerns if it was into a public forum for that resident.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Scott this evening? Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Scott, for being here. The recommended motion is to receive your presentation for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less. Seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? Yes, absolutely. Can we pass this motion, and did you want to put an alternative motion on the
Possibly,
table?
yeah.
Okay.
I was hoping we could have a bit of discussion, because my
Sure.
understanding with our procedures, maybe this is a point of order, if we pass a resolution receiving for information, this agenda item is closed, and we move on to the next agenda item. So I think I would like to have a bit of a conversation about
Yes,
this before that.
absolutely. Please go. Please, can we just suspend that? Keep with it, with the mover and seconder on the motion, suspend the final vote, and have a conversation.
Yes, Madam Mayor, it's subject to your ruling, so
Yes.
absolutely, if that's how you want to proceed.
Okay, absolutely. Councillor Clare.
I just would think it behooves us to have a conversation as council now about how we see this moving forward and what we expect in terms of next steps. I think, Councillor Less has commented on what hasn't been working. So Scott Cameron's given us some ideas of things that we could do for next steps. I've raised some ideas of things I'd like to see us consider, but I'd like to hear from my colleagues about that as well.
Thank you for that. And I'm actually going to just turn it to the CAO for a moment to ask whether or not there had been any discussion about taking forward the presentation and the discussion from the council table into a staff report recommending exactly how we would move forward.
Through you, Chair. That's a great suggestion. I have logged all the comments, especially your next step suggestions, Councillor Clare. I think maybe the path forward is to come back with a staff report saying this, we've heard you, this is what we're recommending. I think that's probably the best approach, and then that could be the direction from council.
Councillor Clare, would you like to make the motion requesting such a report with the suggestions heard around the table and the comments made around the table?
Yes, I would love to do that, and I would be very grateful if the clerk could feed me some language that does that in clerk speak.
Thank you to the clerk. We now have a motion that is up on the screen, and it reflects, I think, the intention of Councillor Clare. Just give everybody one quick second to read through it, and I will be asking for a seconder on this motion. Okay. Councillor Less will second the motion, yes?
Yeah.
And we would like to have a discussion now that we have the motion on the table. Councillor
Yes,
Less?
I'm just wondering, and council feedback with council serving a CAC, is that a foregone conclusion, or is that just going to be brought out in the report, whether it's recommended or not?
Back to our CAO for a comment.
We included, through your chair, we did include that just for clarification that it's council's desire to serve as the CAC and come up with the path forwards. In the absence of that, you know, we could go in different directions, but I think that was the intent of the discussion.
Are you comfortable with that language as a seconder? Okay. Any further discussion on this point? All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. So moving on to the last section of our meeting this afternoon, question period. As I mentioned earlier, we typically do not have question period during special council meetings, but given the interest on the agenda this afternoon, I've asked staff to include the opportunity for members of the public to ask brief direct questions to council members, and this is in accordance with our procedural bylaw. So we ask that the questions during this time be directed to council only. Council is happy to speak to decisions, policies, and priorities. The kind of why questions, if anything, is more technical or operational in nature, the kind of how and when questions. We will take your question, we will record the questions, and we're going to do something a little bit different with the questions coming out of today's meeting. We're going to do two things. One is that each person who asks the questions at the microphone this afternoon will get a fulsome response back from the municipality. Actually, we're doing three things. Secondly, the questions and the answers to the questions will be posted on the municipal website. And thirdly, at the next council member, the questions will be repeated and the answers will be provided in a public forum to these questions. So that's how we're going to handle the questions, and it's also going to ensure that if we get into that technical and operational nature of questions, that we do get a good response back and that council isn't put on the spot of answering things that excuse me, are not in our lane. So at this point, if you do have a question, please approach the podium and state your name, and we'll be happy to take your questions. And just as a reminder, as I do with all question periods, no lengthy context and preambles, just the question, please. So at this point, we'll invite the public to the podium if you do have a question you would like to ask.
Hi, my name is Laura Liberty. I'm wondering if we could get proper timelines for remediation. I have tons of paperwork dated back to 2016 for my family's property to be remediated, and it still has yet to come. Design plans, testing of soil, different paperwork has been sent over and over and over. There is still no remediation. I just saw a lovely picture of the Lions Park that was done with my family's property right in the invisible line that if you saw it, it is not lovely to look at. So some sort of remediation timeline. Like I understand it's going to take a while, but 10 plus years is a little lengthy.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
And although we can't speak to individual properties, I think in general, a question around timelines and information around timelines and accountability around that is something that we will take forward, get a fulsome response, and get back to you. And as I said, we will be answering using all the other mechanisms that I mentioned.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dee. First, thank you specifically to Les and Claire for hearing what our actual needs were with the CAC and what we were looking to achieve out of this. My question is more about whether bringing the CAC into the council function, you guys already have a lot to do. Are you at all concerned about the sheer volume of work that this might create for you?
Thank you for that question. Yes, there is an enormous amount of work that is in front of this council on a number of different projects. I'm going to speak from the chair's position right now and ask my council members if they would like to weigh in on it. I think that one of the things that may be possible through this very clear terms of reference that will be in front of us is what role we will be taking and how that role will be supported by the staff that's already working on the project and through new mechanisms that are being established, like that centralized customer service desk that the CAO has spoken about, and the addition of, for example, some of the elements of the CAC that Councillor Claire has spoken to, as well as the addition of an arbiter ombuds type person that would be introduced into the system. I think these are all ways in which the work can become more streamlined and more efficient. Councillor Claire.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. I don't think this is actually going to create more work. I think this is going to make the work that we already are doing in terms of picking up the phone and responding to emails, and some of us even online and participating and trying to answer questions. This will give us a clearer pathway for how we support residents. So right now we've been doing that work, and I think shouldering that communication responsibility, a lot of us, but without real clarity on what the escalation pathways are and how we can actually provide that input in a way that's meaningful. So this is just going to mean that the work matters more and accomplishes more. So I think that answers it.
And just to add to this, what you're not going to have is the wait time of having to email a number of different individuals, waiting for individual responses. Sometimes those individual responses aren't necessarily on the same page with the same information. So that's where that streamlining of the process is going to be very, very helpful. Any other questions from the public?
Hi, lots of questions, but I appreciate that you're engaging in talks about the CAC, and they'll come up when you make that CAC. That's very helpful. There's currently a vacancy, I believe, in the Director of Environmental Services, and also a resident liaison position that was approved 2 years ago that has never been filled. So I wonder, to assist with the workload for staff and council, if we can get the commitment of staff and council to fill those roles as a priority, and I think that would be helpful to both you and us.
The short answer is yes, but we also have the CAO here. I don't know if you want to speak to just this hiring very quickly, and we'll get a more fulsome response to you about the process.
Yeah, to Mr. Green, yes, definitely. We are moving forward with the revised job. We're doing a little bit of organizational structure, but those positions are definitely coming forward, particularly the director, the resident liaison piece. That's where we need to have a communication and understanding of how, and that'll come out in the staff report, what that looks like from a CAC role and community resident liaison. That is the intent of the centralized community service department. So we're still evaluating that position. The director will be replaced imminently.
Okay. And hopefully that resident liaison position would also be helpful. So given that it's been 2 years, I would hope to see that in the near future. And I believe both those roles, the Director of Environmental Services is 50% responsible for PHAI role, and 50% of the salary is covered by the federal government. And the resident liaison is also covered, if I'm not mistaken. So there would be no cost to taxpayers.
There may be a slightly different formula moving forward, but to our benefit, not to our detriment, so.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Hi, Richard Lane from Bedford Street. I'm a rambler and I could do a lot of backstory. I'm not going to do it. So I have two questions. One's at a higher level beyond Les. Help us understand what power we have to stop this Port Hope initiative, take an audit, take a look way up, and reset the path. Constantly we've been told we have no control, no say. It's not working. But what is truly the legal and process to stop, assess, audit, do more than just a legal assistance, or then go back and move forward?
That's a great question, Richard. I think that one of the things that this council tried to do in earlier days is to show our support for changing the arsenic levels that were part of the cleanup criteria. I can speak for myself to say I've probably had no fewer than a dozen meetings with ministers of health, ministers of the environment, president CEOs of ACL, of CNL, of all other stakeholders to see how we can in fact right-size this project. In the world of policy, this is probably one of the most wicked problems that you would ever encounter in terms of who you need to have thinking the same way about a path forward. And to put it very simply, nobody wants to blink first on this. And this has been the biggest obstacle to that higher level change that your question is really alluding to. Having said that, I actually do think that we finally are at a place where there is an agreement that what has been working or what has not been working writ large has to be changed in a systematic and fundamental way. And I think in the coming months, we may start to see some very large changes that have never been seen in the history of this project.
Tell us more. No? Okay. Okay, that's a very...
I think
okay.
my answer is to try to assure you that although, yes, we are talking about this particular issue at the table, that does not mean that we have not been working at higher levels to try to make fundamental changes.
Very good to hear, because I know while needly pickety day-to-day stuff is important, it's just not working. And we all, in different ways, that's all. Second question is more back to the CAC. How do we influence as residents to ensure maybe not a council-led or approach council only? There are residents, stakeholders who deserve a seat at that table. Even the process to prioritize the high, medium, low priorities coming in from owners, people who are in the remediation process, in line, have a failed experience or other. I just representation, how will we do that? Not just council, and then the whole process behind it. To what and what are the barriers to start on August 1st? Because you know how things go around. What's a timeline? What's a budget? How does it fund? I see we get federal funding back. There's a lot of questions to unpack, but.
No, it's a very fair and important question. I think that one of the things that has been brought to this council's attention around a more of a community-based CAC, if you will, that wouldn't sit with council, especially as we're moving more into small residential cleanups, is issues of privacy. And Scott spoke to this earlier, and that is that there have to be guardrails.
But aggregate data,
privacy,
storytelling is key here.
Yeah, I'm sharing with you what we have been legally advised around the impediment to that. I think we've heard here at the table that there's a motion forward and a staff report coming forward that council will take on the role of CAC, but within the confines of that, there may be mechanisms, and I think some of the things that Councillor Clare spoke with, there will be venues and opportunities to provide more opportunities to hear from other key stakeholders in the community.
Okay, thank you. Let me get my list out now. There's so many more questions, but I think we'll wait to see what recommends and how the CAC will approach, and then, because I think everyone has about 100 questions on their list, whatever they're experiencing in the town right now, and I think we need that formal inputs.
Yeah. And if there are other questions that you or any other member of the audience this evening has, please put them into an email, direct them to the clerk, and you will get a fulsome response, and they will be posted and reported on in the ways that I mentioned earlier.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Clare would like to make a comment about that before we get to the last question.
This is in response to your question, Richard, about community versus council and the CAC, and I just needed a minute to think there because I once stood before a different council at this table and very clearly advocated for a community advisory committee of residents, and I have since changed my view on that, and so I want to own that. And I think partly it's, to the comments the mayor has made around how difficult it is to influence change of a project of this scale. I think the privacy concerns really are real, that people, we already play a representative role where we hear what's going on and we represent community voices from this table. So I see this as kind of a natural extension of that on one of the biggest files really that we have here within the municipality. With a community, if it was a CAC of community residents, my concern is it would create just another body that people could be dissatisfied with, who would then come to council anyway to say, the CAC's not listening to me, or they're not properly advocating for us. So I think this model strikes a balance where residents know who to contact. We can play that advocacy role. We can represent the community interests as we do on all the other files, but also potentially with a little bit more clout as the municipal council. If there were trends that we found where we wanted to push for changes that were broader than in an individual property dispute, then maybe we have a little bit more clout because we are the sitting council as well.
Thank you. And it looks like this might be our final question of the evening. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Faye Moore. I have two relatively quick questions, I think. The first is regarding the arsenic cleanup criteria change. One of the roles of the Community Advisory Committee, which you say you have been performing the functions of, and I don't know from what point in time that began, is to make reports available to the public. And in the highly redacted documents I have received, when asking about the basis for your approval of the arsenic change, it appears to me that Health Canada has not approved this. And so my first question is that correct? That Health Canada and any other regulator that CNL is dealing with since 2017 have not yet approved it. My second question,
Let
sorry.
me answer that just
Okay.
so that I don't lose track. First of all, the decision of the council on the arsenic issue was made after a public meeting at which we were provided with very fulsome evidence and research that we carefully considered. And so the information that we received was in no way redacted, and it was very much in a public forum. We made the decision as a council to support actually a much lower level, arguably, that what is evidence-informed. And in terms of the positions of any other stakeholders, those are in active conversation, including with the Ministry of Health, among others. And I think the real issue here is how do you balance all the different health effects that we have to take into account? First of all, we don't live in a perfect laboratory setting where you can eliminate confounding factors that affect human health when we're determining the direct causal links between arsenic and human health. Secondly, at no point has Health Canada to date contemplated the trade-off between reducing the tree canopy in our community by 80%, potentially, and the effects of arsenic that is deeply in the ground, which if you went to any other neighboring municipality and started digging, you would also find at comparable levels. So this is very much part of the active conversations that we are having at the moment.
I would just add that the redaction I'm referring to is the documents are requested under access to information. And what was redacted was any input from Health Canada, and that applies to AACL as well. They have redacted that. So what you said just now is new information that I think should have been made available to the public, that all of these technical reports from regulators should be on a website.
I think that there's a difference between some of the reports that you're speaking of versus the kinds of conversations that are actively ongoing at the moment.
Okay.
So
Which is not known to us.
There's a distinction, and also, I think, an evolution of the project and an evolution of thinking and an evolution in research and how we understand all the pieces of evidence.
Yeah, and I think that really underlines, I take your point, and it really underlines the necessity of a community advisory committee and much improved communication and disclosure of reports. My second question is, my understanding from what I've read is that the 2023 Special Circumstances Protocol removes the municipality from having any authority over CNL decisions on private property. Is that still the case?
And for that, Faye, just so that we don't miss any contours to the answer to that question, we will get back to you with a fulsome response.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, seeing that there are no further questions from the audience this afternoon, we're going to move on to bylaws 5.1, 23-2026, temporary use bylaw extension, 196 Toronto Road and 2267 Balch Road. Can I get a mover and seconder for this bylaw? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Clare. It is now time for our confirmatory bylaw. All in favor? And it is now time to adjourn our meeting at, that's what I was going at, that everybody was saying. Okay, no, I was at the confirmatory bylaw. Okay, confirmatory bylaw. Confirm the proceedings of the special council meeting of May 5th. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Todd, seconded by Councillor Mink. All in favor? That is passed. I just thought everybody wanted to get out of here as quickly as possible, and so I'm now adjourning our meeting at 5:35 p.m. Thank you.